Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to our weekly webinar. I'm Roxy Glenn, Director of Professional Development. A couple of things I want to let you know in advance is if you have any technical difficulties or any questions specifically for staff, please enter that in the question panes. The questions for our speakers today were all sent in advance. And I am going to go ahead and turn this over to our Director of Government Affairs, Matthew Church.
Thank you, Roxy. Good morning and welcome to the Metro Federal and State webinar. We are fortunate to be joined today by Congressman Colin Allred and State Representative Justin Holland. Moderating today's panel, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for Texas Realtors, Trey Bates, and the 2020 MetroTech Secretary Treasurer, Taylor Walczyk. Before we begin, please note that any questions you would like to ask must be submitted through the chat function or the question function in the Gotowebinar feature, or can be emailed to governmentaffairs@dfwre.net. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Taylor Walczyk, who is your 2020 MetroTech Secretary Treasurer. He's the 2019 MetroTech Realtor of the Year. He's a Texas Realtors Director, a TreePack Trustee for Region 12, and the NAR Federal Political Coordinator for Congressman Colin Allred. Welcome, Taylor.
Thanks, Matthew, and it's my pleasure to introduce Colin Allred. Congressman Allred was student body president right here in Dallas at Hillcrest High School, where he earned a full-rides football scholarship to Baylor University. Congressman Allred played 5 seasons in the NFL before pursuing a career as a civil rights attorney. Congressman Allred served in the General Counsel's office at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Congressman is a member of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, the Foreign Affairs and Veteran Affairs Committees. Welcome, Congressman Allred.
Well, thank you, Taylor, and congratulations on all of your awards. I didn't know if you'd won those.
So, all right, my first question is, having a toddler myself, she's been very active in requiring a bunch more attention. My first question to you is, I want you to share briefly how you, Allie, and Jordan are holding up during this pandemic.
Well, it's been, interesting. I think that everybody with young kids knows that. My wife, Allie, is also working, and so we are rotating responsibilities, and I think we're all appreciating daycare and teachers even more right now during this crisis, where we're having to watch our kids all day, help them with their educational materials, or help them, in my son's case, not to pull down whatever is on the table on top of himself. But it's been great in many ways as well. But we're hanging in there. And I, like I said, my mom was a teacher. I just think that every parent I talk to is feeling a profound amount of appreciation for teachers right now. Absolutely.
Has Jordan made any cameos on Zoom meetings or anything?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially if you don't lock the door. So
yeah,
he's gotten really good at door handles. Yeah.
So our first question on the subject matter of real estate. So given the potential stress on mortgages by COVID-19, do you envision a scenario where the House will address GSE reform as a result of the COVID-19 crisis?
I think we probably, that will be something that may be considered. I'm not on the committees that deal with that, but we recognize the crisis that is coming and also some of the mistakes that were made in the last financial crisis. And I want to ensure that we have a really robust private market that exists in parallel with our government-backed market, and that they're complementary of each other, and that as we go through ups and downs, that we're able to get through this and maintain what I think is really what we all want to do, is keep our mortgage 30-year mortgage system intact. And so when I was at HUD, this is something that a crisis like this is something that I know has been considered about, what happened in the last crisis and what needs to happen here. And I know that I think it's Financial Services Committee has been having some considerations on what to do and how to move forward on this. Obviously, as you know, it's going to have to be bipartisan. It's going to have to be something that everybody agrees on, and hopefully we can reach that. And I think that folks who are in the fields, who are working in these areas, who understand, what needs to be done, that your input now is more important than ever, because there's going to be a lot of reforms that come out of this crisis, and we need to make sure that those reforms are done in the right way and that they're done consistent with what actually needs to be done, instead of being maybe a knee-jerk reaction or something like that.
Sure. So our next question involves taxes. So there's an ongoing discussion of tax cuts during the next round of the federal stimulus. Do you see an opportunity for state and local property tax deductions to be included, which would provide some relief for high property tax states like Texas?
Well, it's certainly something that we're going to be considering, and I think that as we go through the negotiations with the Senate, that may be part of it. And the House version of the bill that's been put forward has a 2-year hiatus on that, on lifting of that cap. But I think that there needs to be a balance here, because we recognize, of course, that during this crisis, we want to provide relief, and I think there is some targeted relief that we can provide. But we also want to make sure we're not cutting too deeply into the revenues, of course, of our state and local governments that are really, really hurting right now, and that are going to be making very, very deep cuts themselves to their workforces and to their programs that they provide. As you probably have seen, Taylor, in Dallas, we're furloughing about 500 city employees right now, and that's through July 30, at the end of July. And from my discussions with the city, I know that they're going to have to make deeper cuts and actually get into essential services if they're not provided with support. And so that's my biggest focus right now, is to make sure that we help cover some of the revenue gaps that our states and cities and localities are going to be dealing with from this crisis. Because if they can't cover those, then of course they are not able to borrow the way we are at the federal level. The only option they have is to cut into essential services. And when they do that, it's often education, it's often infrastructure projects that we want to see done, that we need to have done, and it's often things that are really critical for the communities that need it most.
Right. So speaking of infrastructure, Congressman, you're on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Do you see any bipartisan movement towards finally addressing some infrastructure needs and the potential boost to the economy that these projects may create, specifically in our district, TX 32?
Yeah. Well, I think that we're in the mitigation phase right now, what we're considering with this crisis, and that we'll have a recovery phase as well. And I am quite confident that infrastructure will be a big part of our recovery. On our committee, we have a package ready to go. I think it should have bipartisan support. The biggest hangup has often been around revenue and about how we're going to pay for it and things like that. In a recovery scenario where you're trying to stimulate the economy, the revenue piece is not as big of a hurdle. And so I'm hoping that we'll have bipartisan agreement around that. And for my entire term in Congress here, we've had an administration that says they want to do this. We've had a Congress that say they want to do this, but then we've fallen apart on the details. And so I'm hoping that we can actually get that done. And you're right, for our district and for our area, we desperately need it. We really don't have an option on infrastructure spending because our growth is going to require us to make these investments. Everybody, we often joke, and I remember we used to joke, Taylor, about our traffic and the issues that's creating. But it's not just the traffic, of course. It's also our electrical grid. It's also our water systems. It's access to high-speed internet that's going to have to be, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. But these are all things that when you have a larger pool of people drawing on the same resources, they start to fray. And so I think we're seeing that right now, and we will certainly need that investment. And my fear, of course, is some of the projects that, like DART's D2 project to try and get a second downtown station for the light rail, that's being pushed back, that TxDOT's plans for some of their expansions and repairs to roads are going to be impacted by state budget shortfalls. That's where the federal government's got to come in, make sure those things do still happen, and that we do the other things that we couldn't afford to do on our own. And we can leverage that with private money as well, I think, to really make sure that we are able to meet some of the needs that are there. We've had 1 million people move to North Texas since 2010. We got to deal with that growth.
Right. And Congressman, you've been a true leader in reaching across the aisle, and we really appreciate that. Something that you've heard me talk a lot about is the National Flood Insurance Program, which will also require reaching across the aisle. So for the past few years, realtors have hit the Hill in Washington, D.C., asking Congress to fully reauthorize the National Flood Insurance Program. Do you see any chance of Congress addressing the needs of the NFIP anytime soon?
Well, I haven't heard that as part of these recent discussions, but I do. Obviously, we are having discussions around it, and I hope that it will be something we consider doing soon. And you're right; it's going to have to be bipartisan. And it's, I mean, when we have these discussions, I'm always kind of a little bit surprised that it hasn't happened, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I think we will get there. I think your voice has been extremely important in reaching to both sides of the aisle. You know, there are many issues where you can't have an industry speak with a single and united voice to both sides to kind of communicate how important an issue like this is. And I think y'all have done a very good job of doing that. I think that increases the chances of it happening. I think you just have to continue to push for it because, you know, as you probably know, the squeaky wheel often gets the oil around here. And right now, obviously, the biggest crisis we're facing is around the COVID-19 and all the things that are going into that. But we can't take our eye off some of these other issues that were outstanding before this started.
Right. So now we're moving on to our audience questions. This is something that is relevant right now, especially. There's a news article in the Dallas Morning News regarding broadband coverage gaps. And yesterday on the NAR General Session, we heard Congressman Clyburn from South Carolina talk at length about this. So I wanted to get it would be interesting to get your opinion. With most children not able to go to school for class instruction in the last few weeks, the gaps in broadband coverage in rural areas and also underdeveloped urban areas has been exposed. Is Congress looking at expanding broadband coverage to rural and underdeveloped urban areas?
Yes, we are, and thank you for raising it. I think it's such a really important issue that we need to be talking about. I think access to broadband needs to be treated like a utility that is available broadly and to everyone. You can't compete in this economy without access to broadband. You certainly can't do any kind of distance learning. And while we're asking our kids to learn from a distance during this time, we have to be able to provide them with this support. And so I was surprised, but also not surprised to see in that article that a third of Dallas families don't have access to internet in the home. I think that speaks to the enormous digital divide that we have in Dallas. That it's not just a rural issue; that it is very much an urban issue. And we have to think about these kids who are potentially falling behind during this crisis in their schooling, which is really their top tool and their top ladder to improve themselves and improve their families. I know it was for me. And so this is something that's really, really top importance to me. In our infrastructure package that we have planned, we do have significant investment in trying to expand broadband to everyone. In the HEROES Act that we'll be taking up later this week, we also do have a $50 benefit for households for anyone in a household who's been laid off to help them afford the cost of getting internet. That's really important for folks to be able to find a job, to be able to find access to many, many things. I mean, unemployment, trying to go on the Texas Workforce Commission website. I mean, you can just kind of go down the list. And I think it will make all of our communities be knit together better if we can make sure that everybody has access to this. So it's a big priority for me. Jim Clyburn and the Congressional Black Caucus has been a priority of ours for quite a long time. And I can tell you, when I was at HUD in the Obama administration, we worked very hard to try and expand broadband access. We had some pilot programs that were going on to try and get broadband into our public housing units. And I think that going forward, hopefully we can see that this crisis has exposed just how wide that digital divide is.
I mean, it's something that we all take for granted. I mean, we get annoyed when our internet goes out for a few hours, and imagine learning from home where you don't have internet, period. There was a news story the other day that I saw of high school kids that were camped out in McDonald's parking lots because that's the only internet access that they had. So, Congressman Clyburn talked a lot about the role of the electrical co-ops. It's a little different here in Texas, but do you think that we could leverage some of the utility companies to help in this effort?
Well, I think we need to try everything. And there are, I think some smart ideas out there to try and, maybe through pilot programs like the one we had in the Obama administration, to just give it a shot and see how it works, and then see if we can expand it from there. This is something, as I said, I think it should be a utility, but it also is something that brings additional customers to the providers. And so if you are somebody, an internet provider, it's also in your interest to expand your customer base, particularly if we can guarantee that that bill is going to be paid, that you're going to get that revenue, which I think we can do. And so, it should be a win-win for everyone. And I think that any kind of innovative ideas that we can come up with to cross this divide, I'm more than willing to try. And I think there are a lot of folks out there who recognize that this is an opportunity for them as well.
That's an excellent point. So going back to the HEROES Act, can you expand on that a little bit and give us maybe your idea of the likelihood of it passing?
Well, I think the most important component of it, obviously the two most important components of it, is the aid for states and localities to try and cover their budget shortfalls. And I mentioned that Dallas has had to furlough nearly 500 employees, and that they are considering additional furloughs, and that really past July, we're going to have to start cutting pretty deep into the services that we offer in Dallas. And I know the same considerations are being made in many of the cities across my district and across the state. And when I was on a call with Governor Abbott a couple of weeks ago, he also asked the congressional delegation to make sure we help Texas cover its budget shortfall. And I know that for your group and for anyone who's interested in home ownership, in values of our homes, how important education is and public education is. And just imagine the deep cuts that will have to be made to our public education in Texas, which we know it will be one of the areas that will have to be cut should this budget shortfall continue without it being filled at the federal level, and the impact that will have, the ripple effects that will have, not only on our kids, which of course is the most important thing, but on all of our values of our homes, on neighborhoods we're in. We're just recovering in many ways recently from the budget cuts we had during the Great Recession in Texas to where we want to get back to where we were in terms of state support for education. And so to have to go backwards again would be a huge, I think, mistake. We have to learn from the mistakes we made in the last recession. And I think that was one of the mistakes, was to allow state budgets and city budgets and county budgets to get so deeply impacted, but they also had to fire a lot of folks. And so, about 13% of our workforce works for state, city, and local government. We don't want to increase our unemployment and also cut back on our services we're providing, especially during a pandemic. I mean, we're talking about EMTs will be impacted, really critical services. And the other part that I think that I really want to highlight is the additional funding for testing, contact tracing, and treatment for this virus, because no matter what we do on the mitigation side, and we've done nearly $3 trillion worth of mitigation funding already at the federal level, and we will need to do probably another $3 trillion, which is what we're looking at in this bill. But no matter what we do at the federal level to mitigate this crisis, we will never be able to outspend this virus. The economic impacts of this are not something that we can outspend. We have to beat the virus. And we will not be able to beat it entirely, of course, until we have a vaccine. But what we've seen in countries like South Korea and in Germany and other countries that have been successful at having far less deaths than we've had, far less community spread than we've had. So they were very aggressive about this virus. They weren't just, practicing the social distancing, which is very important. They weren't just using the lockdowns, which is an important tool in the toolbox, but they're also testing very broadly and contact tracing very broadly and isolating and quarantining to prevent the spread of the virus so that folks could have confidence when they re-engage in the economy. And, we had the first case of coronavirus in the United States, the same day that South Korea did. We're over 85,000 deaths, and they're in the hundreds. And they have 4% unemployment. We're pushing, Great Depression levels of unemployment. And so the economic impacts of not being aggressive on this virus are very clear. That's not even talking about, of course, the human impacts. And so, we have to do something about that. And, you may see today on the news in Dallas, these incredibly long lines at our food banks North Texas Food Bank is doing a great job. And, I encourage everyone on this call to support them and help them do what they're doing. But there are lines that are stretching around blocks, miles of cars lined up for food. And we have a lot of money in here for food assistance as well. And so the pain is very real out in the country. And I recognize that. I know that, rent was just due and it's coming due again. And a lot of folks have not been able to pay that. That has an impact, of course, on landlords. I've spoken with many of our banks and our credit unions that are offering, holidays basically on paying off these mortgages. But all this is stacking up, and it's going to have, and the bill is certainly going to come due. So we have to support these things while we can. And the only entity that can do that is the federal government. And so, one of the things that I really want to stress is that whatever the political prospects are of the exact terms of this bill, those big things that are in there, the big ticket items around state and local support, around increasing contact tracing and testing and all those things, they're going to happen at some point. Because we have to do them. The only question is, are we going to do it too late? And so I hope that we don't wait too late. And I hope that we can, reach an agreement that should be bipartisan. Our last bills have been bipartisan. We've been able to find a way. No one has gotten everything they wanted, but we've been able to find a way to come to these agreements to issue, as I said, nearly $3 trillion in support. And I hope that we can continue to do that because we're not over the crisis, and the pain that's being felt out in our communities is really on a scale we haven't seen since the Great Depression, and we have to have really a commensurate response.
We definitely have some work to do. And Congressman, another effort that you reached across the aisle for and kind of spearheaded was opening the VA hospital in Garland. Can you tell us what steps Congress is taking to make sure that our veterans receive care through the VA hospital system during the COVID crisis?
Yeah, and some of the issues we've seen with the VA during this crisis, I do have some concerns around having enough PPE in our VA hospitals, which every hospital around the country has had shortages of, but which we were speaking about this months ago in our committee and trying to help make sure that we were ready for what we thought was likely coming. And the VA, of course, also has always been having capacity issues in areas like Dallas, where you had to wait time in order to see a doctor. You had to wait time in order to have access to a hospital bed because there were so many veterans who were in the area, but only one major hospital location in South Dallas. And it is the second largest in the country, that location in terms of activity. And so getting this VA hospital in Garland has been a huge win for us, and it's going to have long, long repercussions in our communities. And I'll just go over some of the stats. Some of you might have heard me say this before, but they're worth repeating because there's not many things that happen that have this level of impact in terms of just a deal getting done. And I really want to thank Baylor, Scott & White and our North Texas VA for working so hard to get this done. But we're going to be able to serve 184,000 additional veterans because of this facility, which is a staggering figure. We're going to create around 5,000 jobs directly in the facility once it's up and running, and that will also benefit the surrounding area. And I've spoke with the mayor of Garland. I can tell you that they're looking to surround the area with economic activity as well to try and just really revitalize the entire area around the hospital. And it saved the taxpayer between $800 million and $1 billion, depending on how you calculate it, to build a similar facility. So it really was a huge savings of money to have this newly refurbished, recently used hospital be donated to the VA. And that's really something, kind of a model that I think the rest of the country may now look to follow if there are facilities that can be given to the VA to donate them. And I think we in many ways had to blaze the trail on how to do that because, to be honest with you, many elements of federal contracting and our rules around this really don't contemplate something like this happening. So, I am a big supporter of the VA. I think the service they provide to our veterans is second to none. But we have to make sure that, whatever we do, that whatever we do during this crisis, that we don't forget that our veteran communities are some of our most vulnerable communities as well. These are folks who already have many of the underlying conditions that make COVID-19 more lethal because of their service, because of the things they've been exposed to. Respiratory issues, for example. I mean, many of the issues we're looking at with our veterans right now, whether it's from burn pits or toxic exposures, make respiratory diseases like COVID-19 more lethal. And so we have to really keep a focus on this. And as a country, we owe it to our veterans to make sure that they get the care that they need. I'm very proud to be on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I'm really proud that we were able to work in a bipartisan way to get this done. But we're going to have to continue to provide them with the resources to deal with this because it's going to be an ongoing issue. And what we're seeing right now is that the VA, like every other healthcare part of our healthcare sector, doesn't have everything it needs to test as broadly as they want and to have the protective equipment that they need. And so we're going to keep working on that as well.
That was an outstanding contribution to our district. Thank you so much for your work and effort that you put into that. This next question comes from the audience, and it's, do you foresee school campuses opening in the fall? Could you hear me?
I can't hear you. I've lost my audio.
Can you hear now? Is it better? Elizabeth? Can you hear now? No, I've lost. Can you hear now? No. Elizabeth, is there something you can, are you there?
Yeah, now I can hear you again. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. So did you hear the question? I'll repeat it. It came from the audience. Do you foresee schools opening up in the fall?
Schools opening in the fall, is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it's gonna, we're gonna have to see. We're gonna have to wait and see because as Dr. Fauci said, the virus is the thing that's setting the timeline here. Not policymakers, not politicians, and that we have to do what the public experts tell us is safest and how we can best protect our kids. You know, in Germany, they have returned to school and they're sitting 6 feet apart and they're wearing masks. You know, in many of our schools, that may not be possible with the volume that we have, or we may have to consider some sort of mixed, ways of bringing students in and having some stay back or having different schedules, and that'll be something for our school districts to think about. But unfortunately, the truth is that this virus is going to be with us in some ways until we have a vaccine, and we have to be prepared as a society, as Americans, to understand that our first wave of this virus that we are right now still in the midst of our peak in Dallas is only one wave, and that we will likely have another and perhaps another. And that's what most of the epidemiologists have told us. The models that I've seen show that, and it's also been shown in other countries as they've gone through initial waves, they've had other waves coming. And so our experts are saying that in the fall, we will likely see a resurgence of the coronavirus coupled with seasonal flu that may tax our healthcare system, pretty dramatically. And so we have to understand that. And, we may have to take steps where we start to go and do some things back to normal, and then also have to come back and take mitigating steps again. That's just going to be the nature of our lives going forward until we're able to beat this virus. And that's why I'm so passionate and want to see us go on the offensive against the virus, because right now we really don't know where it is or where it's going because we're not testing on a broad enough scale. And we need to do that so that we can understand where it's going, who has it, who's been exposed. But we also will need to move into serological testing so that we can know who's had it, who maybe has developed some immunity to it. I mean, these are things that are happening around the world and that we should be trying to do as well. So I hope that we can have school this fall, and I want to see us able to come back. But that's not really my decision. And really, I think that for those of us in positions of trying to legislate or trying to create policy, we have to listen to the experts. I'm not a public health expert. This is not something I've studied my whole life. It's not something that I spent my career learning. We do have folks who that is their life study. It is what they have spent their career learning. And we have to listen to them. And if they say it will be a risk to our kids to come back and then also a risk to their families, then we have to listen to them and understand that we don't want to risk anyone's lives. And I'll just finish by saying, there's a condition that we're seeing showing up in New York among children related to COVID-19. That's very frightening. That may not be deadly, but that's very frightening. So this kind of idea that kids are immune or that this doesn't impact kids is not proving to be true based on what we're seeing in our country right now. And so I'm going to continue to urge our state leaders, our local leaders, and our federal leaders to follow the expert advice, whatever that may be, and as difficult as that is. And we have to adjust our lives to make sure that we keep people safe, because we will get through this and we will emerge and we will get back to normal life. But we don't want to do it with tens of thousands fewer of our neighbors and of our friends, and with others being permanently impacted by the side effects of the things they might have been exposed to. That's not how we want to get through this.
You know, I did see that article too about the kids with the symptoms in New York, and that's super scary. I know Presley hasn't been in daycare since this whole thing started. Luckily, we can swing that. But so I want to ask another question. This is kind of a broader question, more personal. At what specific moment did you realize that this pandemic was going to have such a profound impact on everyday lives of citizens?
Yeah, I mean, we started to see some very concerning things in March, and we had a hearing in the Foreign Affairs Committee where we were speaking with the Secretary of State, and I was speaking to him and saying, you know, we've not shown recently in this administration the ability to preview and understand what's coming next and to plan for that. This pandemic that is coming is going to force us to do that. We're going to have to get our act together. And, you know, I think that we have seen that our delayed response has, you know, made this far worse. And, you know, that's something that we're going to have to look into when this is over, that we're going to have to learn lessons from how this happened and what mistakes we made, not in a critical way, but in a way that allows us to make sure it never happens again, because this will not be the last pandemic. In fact, as we continue to grow the human population and push into wild areas and to be exposed to things that we weren't previously exposed to, it's likely that these types of things will increase. And so, you know, we knew, I think I came back and held a town hall, if you remember, Taylor, in person at Dallas at the healthcare HHS building in Dallas with Dr. Wong and with Trish Pearl, who's head of infectious diseases at UT Southwestern. And this was before we had any cases. This is, I think, the day when they canceled South by Southwest. And, you know, I was saying, well, you know, businesses are going to have to start planning on how they may be able to work remotely. Parents need to prepare to have their kids at home with them. And I think many folks may have thought that at that time I was being alarmist and that we were maybe saying things that were, you know, why would we have to plan for that? That's not going to happen. But we knew, based on what we'd seen in other parts of the world, that if the same things happened here, that we were likely going to be having to take those steps. And of course, a couple weeks later, we did have to do that. And, you know, I think that Judge Jenkins has led us in Dallas County very well. He's done a very good job of protecting the people of Dallas County. He's listened to the experts. And it's again, none of us are public health experts, but we do have them amongst us, and we have to listen to them. And that's the biggest thing I think we have to learn from this on a policy level, is to listen to expert advice and to take their advice, because if you do, or if you don't, then the outcomes are, you know, so dramatic. I mean, just think about the economic impact of this. We're forgetting, you know, the 85,000 Americans that have died, which I don't want to, but if you just take the economic impact of this, you know, investing, you know, a few $1 billion more in making sure our public health systems were stronger, making sure that we had monitoring of what was happening in China, making sure that the CDC was prepared and that we had the stockpiles of PPE and reagents and testing kits and all the things that we needed. If we'd done that earlier, just think of the money that we would have been saved. And of course, hindsight is 20/20, but this is something that, you know, most public health experts will tell you, that they go through a cycle of panic and neglect, where when there's something happens, whether it's Ebola or SARS or bird flu or anything like that, there's a panic and people want to turn to the public health experts and they say, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then as soon as the issue goes away, the issue gets neglected, they're underfunded, they are kind of ignored in terms of the advice they're offering. And we have to make sure that doesn't happen again.
We are running low on time, so I have one last question. It comes from the audience again. What is something that you and your family has binge watched during the pandemic?
Well, much to my wife's probably chagrin, I've been watching Ken Burns' Civil War documentary again. I don't think that's what she wants to watch all the time, but I've just been in the mood to watch something that kind of takes me out of this moment in time, and also I guess kind of, you know, that was well done and that it takes a long time to watch, you know. And But we're like anybody else. We're watching Seinfeld reruns and pretty much whatever Hulu has. I think we just kind of let it run. But for me personally, it's been Ken Burns' Civil War. I've been reading back some Lincoln biographies that I had read when I was younger, because when I was in middle school, I got very into the Civil War. I thought I knew all the tactics that were used and everything. And I really have not gone back to it in quite some time. And so I'm actually going back through and kind of remembering some of those things. And that's how we've been passing time.
So no Tiger King then.
I haven't watched Tiger King. I am on a bill to try and stop things like that from happening, though, because I think that we shouldn't be, that's not, good for our public safety either.
And Congressman, thank you so much for joining us here. A little different than in previous years. We're not in DC, we miss it, but such is life, and it's better to be safe than sorry. Hopefully next year we can do this in person, but thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for everything that you're doing for your district.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor, and to you and your family, stay safe, and hope we can see you in person sometime soon.
Thank you, and you too.
See you.
Thank you, Congressman. And I will second the Ken Burns Civil War documentary. That is a fantastic watch if you have the time. So our next component of the webinar is the state update, and it is hosted by Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at Texas Realtors, Trey Bates. He's the 2019 Texas Realtors President. He's a third-generation realtor, and he's also the founding member of the South Texas Commercial Association. So without further ado, please welcome Trey and Justin Holland from Texas House District 33.
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate that. And it's an honor to be able to be here today with you to talk about what's happening contemporaneously in our business, as well as what's happening with the state legislature. And it is our honor to have Representative Holland here today to, talk to us about it from a legislative perspective, but also he is a proud realtor and a member of our realtor family, and understands the real estate business. And we couldn't be more proud of his service and having his perspective in the Capitol when making decisions about property, private property rights, and real estate matters. So thank you for your service, and I'm excited to work with you in this coming session. But before we get into the conversation about what's happening around us, share with us a little bit about how this new world of COVID-19 and shelter at home has impacted you and your family, and what y'all have done to kind of survive these last couple of months.
Sure. Thanks, Trey. We're just like everybody else, just a normal family trying to adapt to having 2 kids at home. I have daughters that are 6 and 8. And they are in kindergarten and 2nd grade, and trying to figure out what rooms everybody needs to be in to get the schoolwork done. My wife deserves Teacher of the Year, because she has been juggling all that and putting up with me having several balls in the air, trying to juggle all the things that we have going on. We run a brokerage of around 50 agents in Rockwall, and I also am the state rep and have been involved in daily COVID-19 conference calls and things like that. So we have to pretty much stake out what areas of the house everyone's in. And eventually, sometimes I had to get out and go sit in my office and hunker down at the real estate office. But it has been challenging, but I try to be an optimist about everything. And I believe that whenever this is all over with and said and done, that this is going to be a time that all of our children remember as being with family, and times when we actually sat down at the dinner and talked to each other and ate with each other and spent a lot of time watching movies and on the couch. And so I'm trying to be positive about it as much as possible, just to get to spend time with just the 4 of us at home.
Well, like you, I also treasure the opportunity to spend time with family. And I don't remember the last time I sat down with my kids to play Monopoly or Uno or dominoes or things like that, that we just don't seem to in our normal course of life to be able to just pause enough to spend quality time like that. So it's been a great opportunity to be able to share those moments with family. And So I, like you, hope that they look back on this as a positive experience and something that we can learn from and move forward in our lives and maybe reset what's important.
Amen.
Yeah, exactly. Well, before we dive into the legislative issues and stuff affecting the Capitol and what you're doing in your role as a representative of the state of Texas, let's talk about what you do as a broker and what your involvement in real estate is and how you've tackled this new change in our economy. So why don't we just dive into the residential market sector and what are you seeing impacting that, and what do you think we will see because of these changes?
Sure. Well, from a brokerage standpoint, it's unique that we didn't really know how it was going to affect our industry. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I think many of us will find that if you were in an area that was essential versus non-essential, you were able to continue doing your daily duties as a realtor, as a broker. But it was kind of tough at the beginning. And Matthew and I spent a lot of time early on trying to figure out, what do these orders mean? What does Dallas County versus the governor versus Rockwall County or some of the other surrounding areas at the Metro Tex? So finding out who was essential and non-essential, and the uncertainty at the beginning was a huge hurdle for us. But just the restrictions that it put on showings for people. Can you even go to the showing? Do the people want you in their house? Do I need to sign this new COVID form that's very scary and makes people kind of, pause for a second? Those are kind of the initial hurdles that we needed to get over. I think 8 weeks, 10 weeks later, we are seeing that people are starting to be a little bit more, maybe not lax on it, but they're getting past some of that a little bit, because we're seeing the distancing and the hygiene practices, and people are being smart. If they wear a mask, some people feel the need to do that and would like to do that, and we're okay with that. But other things that I'm seeing in the market, we're gonna have some people that have cash on their hands in the residential market, and they're gonna be able to pick up some deals. I think that people always have to move. People are finding, what I'm also seeing is that there are remodelers and outdoor, pool companies, people that do outdoor living. People have been, stuffed in their houses for 10 weeks, and they're finding things about their house that they either want to change or they want to move, or they would like a new one. Maybe they have a job situation or an economic circumstance that is causing them to have to move. So we need to be prepared as realtors and as brokerages to capitalize on that need, not necessarily on the situation, but people are going to need us more than ever. And it might be because they realize they need a new place to live, or they're downsizing, or the family is growing. We can't let the pandemic completely derail the real estate industry. I really think that leisure properties, farm and ranch stuff, you might see some people trying to get rid of that for equity. People are going to need a little extra cash to move. So be on the lookout for listing opportunities or things where we may need to step in and help somebody be the solution to a problem that they have just in their immediate family circumstance.
Those are good points, because I saw a graph recently that said that our showings dropped significantly right about towards the end of March. And that was a significant drop, just like everybody expected, because we basically shut down everything, and there was a lot of confusion out there what realtors could do with regard to their business. And it went from all over the state. We were tracking every county and trying to keep a spreadsheet on every county and what their shelter-in-place order said and what that meant with regard to real estate. And then we also tracked down to each municipality and what their order said and what that meant to real estate, so that we could at least communicate with our members about what they were capable of doing in this time frame. And so there was a lot of negative information out there for realtors that basically said, don't do this, don't do that. And so we tried to change our conversation to, what can we do?
Right.
And so I think that was a positive move, because guess what happened was showings. There's a showing service out there that tracks the number of appointments made for showings. And we saw that precipitous drop occurred towards the end of March. But you know what's great about realtors is we figure things out. And we say, okay, well, what can we do? How can we adjust our marketing techniques? And that graph actually showed a very nice kind of growth curve that we're almost back to 2019 levels of showing rates at this time of the year, because our members have adjusted and have gotten back to business and are seeing some positive things of their ability to transact business. So those are some positive things that I've seen how our members are reacting to this.
You know, Trey, in that same vein, we've seen a huge increased reliance on technology. I mean, we already have started as an industry embracing things like electronic signatures, dot loop or DocuSign or digital ink type technology. But I found it in our firm, and others around found it very helpful to use the Matterport or the virtual tours type technology for people that were sitting in their homes that couldn't go look. FaceTime in the areas that they were allowed to. Agents were going and just doing virtual tours, being safe about it and letting people do a preview via FaceTime before they went and saw it. We have, people are going to have to adapt to this. I mean, this might be part of the way that we do things. And so if you're not able to, use this electronic technology, it's a sink or swim type deal. We've always had to do that in our industry, even when the internet came, and started being a huge factor in the way that people look for homes. We used to have people telling, we would tell them what homes we wanted them to go see, and now they're telling us, and that continues to evolve.
Very true. We've seen the dynamics of our members being able to adjust to changing times, and even back from the 70s when the brokerage models were changing, and then the internet impact of our business and moving from a printed MLS book to now going off the internet. We've been through constant change, and this is just another one of those things. So I look forward to how our members can respond to that, but I'm glad to see that they are accepting the change and moving forward with their business. And those are all good indications of how they're able to do that. So we've talked about residential real estate. We've talked a little about the technology that is impacting our business and how we need to embrace that in the new norm of our economy. So tell us a little bit about how those changes might be impacting the commercial aspect of our world.
Right. I mean, this is one of the biggest topics that people are talking about right now, that, if you are in any commercial circles at all, or people that own businesses, or even just in conversations now that you're starting to maybe get back and talk to people about how things have been, just an example of what we're doing right now. I mean, nobody knew what Zoom was or talk. I mean, Zoom is now a household term. And so we are finding out that all these people that have been in office space and businesses that take 5, 7, 10-year leases out on office space are seeing that people that work for them are just as or more effective and efficient at home and doing their work from the comfort of their home or a home office, and they may like that. They may thrive in that situation a little bit better. And so I think what's going to happen, and you're going to see something to this effect, is that people are going to realize, hey, I don't need this much space. I need 75% of what we have, or 50, or maybe some people say, why do we even have an office? And so not that that's a great thing for the commercial real estate market. We need to be ready to adjust to that. I think that relocations into Texas, we have 1,100, I think is the number, somewhere around there, people moving into the state per day. I think that's what it is. It's a bunch. Somebody fact check that for me, but we have people that are still moving here. We have companies that are relocating, and I think that is going to absorb some of that space. And then just the private sector, the ingenuity of the people in Texas are going to figure out, this is how we're going to fill this space. And but you're going to see people that that really say, I don't need this much office space. And then on top of that, you know, just like Colin said, you know, rent's due and mortgages are due on all these things. And you got, you know, even myself, I've got a 4,000 square foot building that sat empty for 2 months because we told people to stay at home and work from home. And luckily we were able to kind of, you know, make that happen, but not a lot of people can. And so commercial real estate and they're always kind of the first ones to get hit. And I think that there's going to be a lot of inventory available in the years to come, and the way that people view how their business needs to operate and who needs to be really in the office. The upper management, key members of the team, we need you there, we need you talking, but there are people that are very effective just not even coming in.
Good point, because even in the small ecosystem of what we have here at Texas Realtors, we send everybody home as well. And we're still operating at top capacity and performing at a high level, even in this environment. And we're trying to have the conversation about slowly opening the offices again, if we possibly can. And everyone seems pretty comfortable being able to work from home. And on top of that, I saw an article this week about the Manhattan office environment, and big tenants like JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley that have thousands and thousands of employees and multiple thousands of square feet of office space in the Manhattan district are talking about not needing that much space anymore, because all their employees are happier not having to deal with a commute. They're happier about being able to have the flexibility of working from home. Like you said, they're performing at high levels, and some are even excelling. And I think this forced upon us change in how we do work has opened eyes of managers and business owners that, you know, I always thought having people there so I can kind of watch over and make sure operations are good and my clients and customers are being taken care of, are realizing that, hey, this actually does work. And so you're right. I think it's going to have an impact on office space for sure. And it'll create a lot lower demand for office space. And so we're going to see some ripple effects of that in our downtown markets, and maybe even in some of the suburban areas where people would prefer to work from home. And that also has a ripple effect on the residential market, because a lot of people were starting to think, well, maybe I don't need as big a home as I used to think. Maybe I could downsize. But now I think after having to spend all this time with their family in close quarters, I think they're thinking maybe I might need some more space. So that might have an impact on office, on layouts of residential too. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was definitely ready to get back into the office after 8 weeks of working out of the home office. We opened up as soon as the governor started putting out his "we're going to reopen" orders. You know, in our real estate office, and probably many of yours, we don't have a whole lot of situations where people are sitting on top of each other anyways. I mean, our front desk has people sitting 8, 12 feet apart, and individual offices, we have a bullpen where people sit. You know, we reopened right away on, you know, May 1st or whenever you were able to, just because, you know, also as a team, you know, you do need to be back together. There's something about being together, feeding off of each other's energy, and talking about experiences that you're having. The way that people learn in our industry is bouncing ideas and problems off of each other, and gaining that experience on, you know, just deals and contracts and mortgage issues and the things that, you know, we're seeing. You know, I learn a lot by just answering questions to the people that come in and ask us. I'm actually a producing broker as well, so I do deals, but I mean, I learn half of what I know from people's problems that they're doing on their deals. So we do need to be back together, and I was happy that we worked a way into getting people back to work and opening the state back up in a safe and responsible way.
No, I agree with that. I think a lot of our realtor members we're naturally people, and so we like to have that opportunity to interact with people, and we're a lot more effective having that eye-to-eye kind of interaction, so that we can communicate what's going on with the deal or whatever we're working on. And I think that we're a lot more effective that way. So we're just trying to learn in this new environment to be as effective. But there's still a need for us to get together every once in a while, and hopefully in our new normal, we'll have that opportunity soon. So after having a little bit of a chat about the residential market, and the commercial market, what other things that impact us directly or have to do a lot with the lending market, mortgage industry, and the banking industry, and how that's going to impact our members and our ability to do business? What do you see as a realtor and as a legislator, kind of how this stuff is going to roll out to impact us?
Sure. So the immediate, just right off the top of my head, is rates stayed low and even dropped to some degree. And so people were still moving and using the mortgage market. And what that did, in the experience that I've seen and from others that I talked to in our industry, is it's really jammed up the mortgage companies and banks with their pipelines. It's just taking longer to process a mortgage. It's taking longer to get an appraisal. The pandemic virus situation caused people to either not be able to go into homes to do an in-home appraisal to see what types of mortgage products were available to do the desktop or the drive-bys. Depending on the type of funding you were getting, some allowed that, some didn't. And now just the sheer volume of people trying to get 3% to 4%, in the 3 to 4 range mortgages has jammed it up. It doesn't take 30 days anymore to close a house. It's 45 or 50 days, depending on the lending institution or bank, and then what their appraisal and underwriting departments are having to put up with. And so really right now, we're going to fight. We're fighting against timelines, but also now with the SBA and the PPP things, I think we're going to see a lot of those banks are tied up on business lending. And if it's not a mortgage company and it's a one of the banks that are handling both, and they do hold mortgages or sell mortgage products, access to capital has been something that I think you're going to see continue to be an issue. I know specifically in the Permian Basin, in the Midland and Odessa area, which is not near us, but the oil and gas industry certainly affects us all over the state of Texas. We'll talk about that here in a little bit on the state side, but they are not making real estate loans right now. I mean, I have a friend who lives out in that area, works for an oil and gas company, and was helping him on a deal. And we called around to banks, and they just said, and I was working with my colleague Brooks Landgraf out in Odessa, and he said, man, everybody I'm talking to says they're spending all their capital and time and effort on SBA and businesses and the oil and gas. So depending on your location in the state and the concentration of lending of what that bank does, lending is drying up. Some of the big banks are even just saying, we're going to take a pause and figure out what's going on. What are we looking at here so that we don't expend them? I mean, because lot is at stake here. You have inflation. We have recessions that we can be looking at, and follow the money. The dollar is something that we can't get out over our skis. We know that in 2008 we had a problem with that. The banks were not well capitalized to handle that situation. I feel like now they learned from that 10, 12 years later, but we just have to make sure that our industry stays flowing, and whatever we can do to help and encourage, develop policy that helps mortgage companies and banks to be able to keep their flow of business responsibly going is going to be ultimately good for us. It's not just the way that real estate is. Most people don't pay cash for homes. They have to go get a mortgage, and they have timelines and school coming up. Maybe, hopefully, people have to move and summers, and anybody that's doing any number of deals right now is feeling the pain of timelines and inconveniences from the mortgage market starting to be affected a little bit more too. And so really, we got to watch this mortgage industry. I think we've learned from some mistakes from the 08, 09, 07 area, but I'm a bit concerned about that. We need to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to keep an eye on it, because even with some of this forbearance stuff that occurred, how is that going to impact your credit score if you actually took advantage of that? And also, with some of that happening, some of the mortgage servicers were impacted directly, where they didn't have the capital to be able to take care of some of those loans that they had in their portfolio. And then that's had a direct impact on the secondary mortgage market, where those non-conforming loans, that money's basically dried up now. And even in the conforming loan arena, we have a little stricter guidelines on people meeting those requirements. So you're right, the mortgage industry is certainly trying to kind of put a pause on things and try to see what they can do to continue, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and that gives them a lot of problem. And we've seen that both in the non-conforming markets and the conforming market as well. Let's see. I think we've kind of hit on a lot of the real estate side of what your experience has been, and where you've been able to share with us some of the things that you've been doing to kind of work with your brokers and with your agents and your offices. Let's go more into the other hat that you wear a lot of times, and that's the state legislature, and how that impacts what we're doing, and what COVID-19 has made an impact going into the things that we already knew were issues coming into this next legislative session as we prepare for that. So kind of walk through some of the issues that we're dealing with coming into the next session, and maybe how COVID-19 has a kind of a layered onto that as an additional concern of yours.
Sure. Well, you mentioned we already knew there were going to be some things that we had to deal with, namely redistricting was the number one thing that this, the term or the session was going to be about, and that is coming up. But we have a lot of things up in the air right now. We are going to have a new speaker. So as soon as the elections are over in November, there will be a mad dash for a new speaker. We won't know, who that's going to be until we know who the players on the field are going to be. And
Before
so
we go any further on that, are you going to be the next speaker possibly?
no, I certainly don't think so. I'm not. No, I definitely would like to be an effective person in the session, but that's not something I'm interested in.
Okay, just wanted to make sure you're on the record for that.
Thank you. I appreciate you for putting me on the record for that. So the balance of power just in the House has always been something that's really important, as the flow of legislation happens. And we've got 83 Republicans and 67 Democrats, and that's a tight margin. And as the political landscape in Texas continues to change, that could stay the same. It could change one way or the other. So we need to know who the players on the field are, and then pretty quickly there will be somebody that will emerge, and then the new leader will need to take on a bunch of these issues. And one being, how do we focus on what has happened, what has transpired in 2020 to make sure that pro-business legislation, regulatory environment are all important. There's a lot of things that were lifted. As you know, there were new orders going out every single day, and the governor lifted a few things that maybe made it a little easier for people to do electronically or in, quarantine circumstances. I think you might see some benefit from that. There's going to be a lot of things that we don't have to be so regulatory on certain things. I mean, it's needed in certain areas, but maybe I love the fact that you could do a notary public stamp over for real estate transactions and whatnot. Maybe that's something we can keep. Maybe there's a lot of positive that comes out of this. Jobs and economy are going to be big. We're going to have a huge deficit probably. I wish I had a crystal ball. The controller, Glenn Hager, is going to be coming to us later this year with just some figures, and he'll give us a real number of what we have to get to spend. But we know that we're up against the wall. Everything's going to be on the table for consideration in terms of funding and appropriations for a new biennial budget. And we have to protect certain things. I mean, our industry really thrives on, if you're a realtor and you are involved in this organization, you're watching this, that public education really matters, and infrastructure and water and roads and transportation matter. And so we have to make sure that we got to roll up our sleeves this time. Every session brings its new challenges, but on top of, coming off a great session and a really, really, what we thought was, a home run, now we're going to have to be faced to, with some really tough decisions as it relates to things like public education and funding of projects that maybe we don't have as much disposable income as a state. The oil and gas industry has dipped and oil is trading low, and that hurts a lot of our budget. The severance taxes that we pull in and our rainy day fund and all of the things, the implications that you have there. We really didn't think that we were going to have to deal with this. Things happen. And so, we're in that position for a reason. Redistricting happens every 10 years. The census that everybody should be filling out, if you haven't already, that data they're talking about, and I think maybe Colin could tell you this, but in the HEROES Act, I think that that's going to be dictated a little bit about when the Fed is going to deliver that information to the states. Well, we have a 140-day session that starts in January and ends in May. We only have a couple of weeks to draw those maps once we get the real information, and it usually comes in March. Well, if we don't get that information until July, guess what? There's a special session next summer on redistricting. So those are the types of things that we're watching really closely. And obviously, we're going to deal with what we have, the cards we've been dealt. But we really see things like redistricting, things like jobs economy, pro business and regulatory types of bills that you're going to see. We want everybody in Texas to be able to operate as efficiently and effectively as possible with the new circumstances that we've been put in. There's a lot of unknowns. We don't know what's happening with schools, what's happening with fall and sporting events and public events and municipalities and concerts and, the way that our economy operates. You're seeing the effects of that right now. The things that got shut down, they're the things that are hurting. People are losing their jobs. People have been furloughed. People are just now kind of trying to limp back into this, and we need to do it safely. But I think it's inevitable that we have to do it or else we're really going to be in big trouble.
Well, I see that. And, the great thing about realtors is we're always about, trying to make sure we have a fair tax system, making sure that we have a great school system. And yet we've also had the fortunate benefit of being protected in a lot of ways with regard to a lot of the things we do as realtors. A number of sessions ago, we have no transfer tax. It's a constitutional amendment that was passed. We are also protected on our personal property business taxes for our automobiles. We have a number of things that are built into the system that are beneficial to realtors that we've worked hard on over the years. But the things that you mentioned, we have a huge budget deficit potentially in front of us, a lot of constraints, and making sure that we can deliver for schools. Do you think real estate or aspects of real estate could be at the table? And where do you see the biggest concerns for us to be focused on to make sure that we're paying attention coming into the next session? Do you see anything that we need to be really concerned about, even sales price disclosure and things like that with regard to the property tax system?
Well, every session you're going to have 6,000 or 7,000 bills that are filed. And I really think that it's going to come down to prioritization of what's important. And the House kind of takes care of that itself. I mean, we're able to sift through things and shuffle things that are important, things that aren't. There's a ton of ways. This process isn't designed to pass bills. It's designed to kill them. You only pass about 20% of what's filed historically, or at least the sessions that I've served. And so my advice to realtors would be, let's stick to blocking and tackling. Let's stick to the issues that mean a lot to realtors. If there's some side fringe things that we need to take care of, we'll deal with those as we can. But for us, schools and infrastructure and transportation and water and the things that make our communities great, the reasons that people want to move into communities, we have to just stick to the advocacy there. And we're strong. We're a strong organization. We're not going anywhere. We've got a ton of members and very active. And so, come to Austin and be involved locally and get, if there's anything you could do, it'd be to learn the individual issues, not just on a state wide scale, but learn what your individual ISDs and your city councils and your county commissioners go and talk to them about their CIP projects and what's coming up, what's coming down the pike in terms of projects and road and transportation and schools and things like that. That way we can be protected at a local level as well at the state level. And because you guys have always been great, we've always been great at just making sure that that no stone goes unturned as it relates to those 7,000 bills. I mean, you guys are looking through those and sifting through them and coming and talking to us and making sure that what's good for Texas is good for realtors.
Well, that's a great point, Justin. At this time of year, it's a great opportunity to engage with our taxing districts and talk to them about their budgets and while they're setting priorities for budgets. And then that also translates into the rate setting timeframe that they are about to engage in after they have talked about their budgets. So if we stay engaged locally, talking to our taxing districts, the councils, the county commissioners, and then also the other districts that are impacted our tax bill, we need to understand their budgets and where their priorities are, and then make sure that we're engaged in those conversations as they start setting those rates that impact our tax bill. So that's a great opportunity for us to kind of stay engaged now as we walk into the next session.
Well, I think it's a great opportunity twofold. One, to stay in front of your clients in your sphere of influence always. But this is a great way to reach out to your client and your book of business, saying, here, listen, I'm not asking you for business. I'm trying to help you, and educate them about that property tax system and what things are. Nobody should pay more than their fair share. People are really mad about the notices they just got in the mail right now. But it's not just values. If your value's wrong and you disagree with it, one of your most important rights as a homeowner, as a taxpayer, is to be able to go and protest that. And you should. And we should be able to provide them with data that shows that their house is being assessed more than it should be. But if it is the right value, the fair value, it's just one part of the equation. The next part is making sure that your city council, your school boards, and your county commissioners know that you expect for them not to bring in any more than they need to or than they did last year. We did a lot of work in SB2, a lot of work on property tax and no new revenues. You need to educate yourself on what we did last session. And also just to go and engage with them and understand when the rate setting process is. I sat on the city council for 5 years before going to the legislature, and those are coming up, and they're going to start having budget work sessions this summer, July and August, and you guys need to be involved in that. You need to go and make sure that you understand what are they budgeting for and how much money are they going to raise. It's just the value is one thing, and people don't like their values going up if it means their taxes go up, but it doesn't mean that they have to. If that rate stays the same or goes down, or they adopt an effective rate, the revenues don't change, then those are the types of things we need to educate them about. If you have a book of business of 100 or 500, you should be reaching out to those people and letting them know, hey, I'm your realtor, I'm your broker. I just want you to realize that the tax deadline is tomorrow the 15th. If it went out late like they did in Collin County, it's June 15th. You get another 30 days to be in front of your people without asking them for business. You're trying to help them and be a resource.
I tell you what, we're fortunate to have realtors like you in the legislature, because that voice and what you just said, I couldn't have said better. And having your voice there is a great benefit to all Texans because of your experience and knowledge of that system. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And it's an honor to get to do it. And I'll say this every time I get a chance to be in front of realtors. I would not be in the legislature if it weren't for the Texas realtors.
Well, we appreciate your service, and I do have some audience questions.
Okay.
If that's okay. So
yeah.
The first one is, as a member of the State Affairs Committee, what role has your committee played in the state's response to the COVID-19 health crisis?
So the main thing that we deal with, or one of the main things that we deal with, are items that are related to the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, and the electricity industry. So one of the main things that I saw from a state affairs perspective were just electricity companies and public utilities and all of those that are part of the tiered system of electricity in the state of Texas, is just making sure that they were putting programs out there that helped people make those payments if they needed to. They understood, that people were in a jam a little bit. And so I think from a major perspective, I saw that. And then I just saw some of the big companies give back to the communities. I mean, I got calls, I won't name anybody specifically, but I'm getting, electricity companies and phone companies and different things like that that are coming and saying, we're about to give $10,000 to your local helping hands or your food pantry or your whatever. So I saw really the electricity and the utilities and broadband and those types of companies really come together to try to help the situation and be a resource. And they understood that people maybe couldn't pay, or they're giving some forgiveness or some discounts and things like that. That would be the major thing from a state affairs perspective.
Good deal. We're glad you're there paying attention to that stuff. I do have a question going back to property tax reform.
Okay.
In the last legislature in SB2, there were a lot of measures put in place to protect property owners and to help with the growth of property taxes. But do you think the COVID-19 crisis will create an opportunity to undo some of that, and or do you think there will be a renewed effort to continue with the SB2 direction?
Well, my answer would be I would certainly hope not. I would certainly make it would be disappointing if any municipality or taxing jurisdiction took it upon themselves to capitalize on the pandemic rather than to do the right thing. We put the 3.5% revenue cap in there on revenue, not on values. And there is some question out there as to whether or not a pandemic or a medical disaster is the same thing as a hurricane or something that might cause a city or a place to have to, this is definitely a costly problem that we've been faced with, but it's not the same thing as a, act of God or a natural disaster that would cause billions of dollars worth of actual money that somebody would need to raise those revenues. I think the real thing goes back to what we talked about before. Those local city councils need to know that we don't want them to be spending more than we said they could. And that's not a popular thing. SB2 wasn't a popular bill when you were talking to locals. I try to have the best relationship that I can with my counties and cities and schools, and that generally is pretty good. But we have to make sure that they know we don't want them to take any loophole or take the opportunity to capitalize on more money than they need. And that's out there. We know about it. We're watching it, and we're gonna hold people accountable. But the thing is you got to show up and be present and be there. Whenever I was on the city council and whenever I have people that I go to a town hall or somebody's asking me questions, they sit on a city council. I say, Councilman Joe, how many people were at the tax rate hearing last year? Some people say 1, some people say 4, some people say 6. And I'm talking about big cities like Frisco. There might be 10 or 12 people show up to that meeting whenever they're talking about it. So we elect those people to be representatives of us, but we also have to show up and make sure that we're still a part of the public process.
Well, I tell you what, a potential positive benefit of the delays in the elections for the local districts that were supposed to occur in May that have been delayed to November. The potential benefit to that would be, if I did my math right, the rate setting would occur about 2 weeks before early voting would start. And so that might be a good way for us to judge our future elected officials by determining how they deal with our future budgets and how they set the rates for our taxes.
It could be, yes.
So everyone paying attention, watch your local districts and watch how they vote, because that'll be a good indication to you in the November elections, how this, that'll be your opportunity to speak loud and clear about how you feel about their budget setting and priority setting process. So Justin, I can't thank you enough for the time that you've given us today. And I just want to say we really do appreciate you being a member of the legislature, being a realtor, serving above and beyond, and having your expertise and knowledge there, and being a great partner to work with whenever we need to deal with real estate issues is a huge value and asset to all of our members. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of all the Texas Realtors and MetroTex for your service.
Thank you. It's an honor to get to do it, and I look forward to serving alongside all of you next session.
Well, I think that ends our questions. Matthew, did you have anything for us to finish up?
No, I want to thank you, Trey, and thank you, Justin, and also thank Taylor Walczyk and Congressman Allred for joining us today. This has been very value add for our members, and just let them know that we will, once this recording or this webinar is done, we will save it, and then if you are a participant, you'll be able to see it again digitally if you want to go back and reference anything on it. So we appreciate you guys taking the time for us, and look forward to working with you in the future.